Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Taking Care of HR in Turbulent Times. Our presenter today is Janine Litchfield, who is a human resources consultant and trainer here at CPS HR Consulting. For your convenience, the slide deck for today's session and an additional resources list is available on the CPS HR Consulting website. Please visit www.cpshr.us/about/events/webinars to download them. This session is also being recorded. We'll post a link to the session on the webinars page of our website as soon as it's available. To ensure a high-quality recording, all attendees are in listen-only mode. Please be sure to keep your mic muted to prevent interruptions to the session. If you have any questions for Janine during the session, please enter them in the webinar Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. We'll address the questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. And now, let's get started. Janine?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Taking Care of HR in Turbulent Times. It's nice to have you here this afternoon. My name is Janine Litchfield, and I'm an HR consultant, former HR executive, a speaker, a coach, and just a trainer at a CPS HR as well. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. As we have a number of HR people on the line today, we have a lot going on in our personal and professional lives. And so I think this is a really timely topic to talk about. How are things going for us and how can we take care of ourselves? You know, the situation comes to mind for me with right now as we think about, you know, those announcements that they make when you're about to take off in an airplane. If an emergency were to occur, mask before you, please put your oxygen mask on yourself first. And I think that that's really indicative of right now, indicative of how we are right now. And so as HR people, to be able to take care of others, we really need to be able to care for ourselves first. So I think that this can be a really nice metaphor for us. Put it back in your brain. Before we can care for others, we must take care of ourselves. And so that's what we're hoping to do during this hour and a half that we're going to have together today as HR professionals, is to talk a little bit about how can we care for ourselves. And my intent is by the time that we're done today is that we're going to talk about some strategies on how you can reduce overwhelm. We've got professional overwhelm, we have personal overwhelm, there's just a lot going on. So we're going to be talking about how can you reduce that overwhelm that you might be experiencing right now. We're also going to talk about ways to set some appropriate boundaries for ourselves and for our teams, because oftentimes our teams are also experiencing similar things that we're experiencing right now. And then the third thing that we're going to be talking about today is how can we prioritize? If we can't do it all right now, how can we prioritize? And we've got a really nice method in which to do that. So we're going to be talking about urgency and importance and being able to differentiate between those two things. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So as we talk about overwhelm, I'd like to hear from, we're going to do a poll. Julie's going to pull up a poll in just a minute. So the question is, what's causing overwhelm for you? Why did you come to this webinar today? So the poll is up there. So, and check all that apply to you. Maybe there's uncertainty and so many things going on. It's work, it's home, it's my kids, it's the news, it's everything, just so much uncertainty. Maybe it is increased workload. Some of it might be due to new regulations. Some of it might be to we're working in a new environment. So just increased workload. C is going to be working from home. Many of you are trying to figure out how to work from home, how to keep the dog from barking while you're on conference calls, those kinds of things. Some people are being a parent and a teacher and an employee, and that can be difficult. So check that if that applies to you. Shelter in place itself can cause overwhelm. We are at home. Many of us, some of us are going into the office, and it's a different environment right now with going into the office. So let's hear what you came up with.
Okay, So let's see, it looks like about all of the answers are just about there. I'm seeing a pretty clear leader. We'll have this closed in
Nice.
just a moment. Okay.
If you have anything to add to that other section, maybe it didn't fit in the A through F category, go ahead and type that in the chat box in the chat section, and Julie will kind of help us out by reading some of those off.
There we go. Okay, so coming in the lead was answer A, uncertainty. We had 69% of our respondents come in with that, and not really surprising. Second and third were just neck and neck between working from home and work-life balance. After that, we had a tie between increased workload and shelter in place. And that's certainly a stressor for many people. And then it was being a parent, teacher, and employee. And last but not least was other. So
Okay.
there we go.
All right. All right. Wow. You know, this is a lot right now. It really is. And it's causing overwhelm for a lot of us in a lot of ways, right? We are, you know, we're employees, we're HR professionals, we're parents, we're a little bit of everything. And so this overwhelm can be really difficult. And so being able to identify what is it that it's causing some of your overwhelm. We've got a few other things that might be in this list as well. Maybe a little bit of burnout. Sometimes when you're working from home, it can be hard to know when quitting time is. And with so much going on right now, I know that emails are going on day and night right now, trying to solve problems that we've never solved before. Some of you might be experiencing dealing with layoffs and having to plan for some of those kinds of things as well, which is never something that we want to do. That's one of our, to me, that's one of the really hard parts of being in HR is dealing with that. Safety, both safety and security, people's health, distractions. Working from home can be distracting. I don't know about you, but my refrigerator is way too close to my workstation. And so just really kind of feeling all these things and being able to understand, okay, what is it that we can do? How can we try to balance some of this overwhelm? What controls, what strategies might we have that can help us with some of this overwhelm? So let's go ahead and start talking into our first strategy that we're going to be discussing. Our first strategy is going to be setting some boundaries. Now, as we look at boundaries, oftentimes the first thing that comes to my mind is, you don't get it. I just don't have the ability to create boundaries at work. And let's talk work first. We'll talk work first, and then we'll talk home in just a minute. My boss says if my boss says that I have to, I must, then I must, right? You know, what are some of the projects that we have that maybe we can set some boundaries with that? Maybe it is some of the work day. How long is our work day? And even that work-life balance. Okay. How can we set some of those boundaries? Okay. The next thing is in setting boundaries, do we have the ability to decide who should do the work? And even if the work needs to be done, does it need to be done right now? Or could we wait a few minutes? Could we wait a little while? Could we wait a week, a month, 3 or 6 months? Could we wait that long? Do we have the ability to delegate? And now I want to talk to everyone about this one, because delegation is not just for managers. It might be that this workload, this project has landed in HR's lap or landed in your lap. And then you might say, really, should I be the one doing this or should someone else be doing it? Okay, so that can be another strategy in creating boundaries. The next bullet that we have there is prioritizing. And we're going to talk quite a bit about prioritizing. How do we prioritize our work? How do we decide what gets done, what doesn't? Is it important? Is it urgent? Those kinds of things. And so we're going to talk quite a bit about prioritizing. So we're going to come back to that one a little bit during this time as well. All right, the next thing as we talk about workload boundaries is going to be, how can we form alliances? both internal to our organization and external to the organization. So are there people internal to the organization that might help us with some of the workload that we're doing? Also, have we formed alliances with other HR professionals and other organizations, maybe even vendors, to be able to redistribute the work? And then the last bullet that we have here is, you guys, don't be afraid to ask for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, especially during this time. There is so much going on. We've really got to be able to focus on and remember that we too might need to ask for help. So think a little bit about setting those boundaries. What are some of these types of ways to set boundaries that might work for you? We've looked at this primarily from a work perspective, but I encourage you to also think about it from a personal perspective. Is it that I need to work with my family to talk about setting some boundaries? Can somebody else empty the dishwasher, right? Does this work have to be done right now? Because remember, this isn't just free time. This isn't just time where we're trying to work from home and keep the normal pace up and keep the normal routines up. This is really a time where that is unprecedented and there's a lot going on. So even in your personal life, think about, is it work that needs to be done? Okay, so as you think about these boundaries, I want you to be thinking about specific examples for you, both from a work context as well as from a personal context. All right, so let's take a minute. So setting boundaries sounds all good and everything, but I think it's important for us to think about what happens if we don't set boundaries. Maybe what happens if we keep things going the way that they are right now? We're feeling overwhelmed already. There's so much going on. We're sheltered in place. We've got all these different projects that are going on. What happens if we don't set some boundaries? And let's think about what are the impacts of that. So first of all, there's the personal impact. You might feel stressed. You might feel overwhelmed. You might even think about, is it causing strife with my family, right? If I'm not setting boundaries, is it also really disrupting my work-life balance? Okay, so think a little bit about that. Other consequences of not setting boundaries could be your personal performance. If you have too much on your plate and you've been this rock star performer, and now all of a sudden you've got way too much on your plate, could it result in you missing some deadlines? Maybe the quality of your work or even the quantity of your work could be negatively impacted if you're not setting some boundaries and trying to really focus on and be strong about setting some of those boundaries. In the long term, it can also impact things like your reputation. Okay, so I encourage you, think about, how do I set boundaries? What boundaries do I need to set? The third consequence in not setting boundaries could be team results, right? Your teams might not be meeting the critical needs that they have. Your team's reputation could also be negatively impacted. So learning the word no, or learning the word not, or the words not now, could be very important to protecting your team's reputation during this time. As we continue around towards the bottom half of this slide, there can be organizational impact. So if we're not setting boundaries, what kind of organizational impact could it have? Could it be that we significantly run over budget, and can it cause financial problems that are more widespread throughout our organization? Could it be that maybe we're not meeting our collaborative goals? Oftentimes in HR, we partner very closely with other parts of the organization in hiring and onboarding, and a lot of our key performance indicators are actually accomplished through our partners, both internal to the organization and external to the organization. So if we're not setting appropriate boundaries on what a realistic workload is and what our priorities are, it can have even greater impact into the organization. Another way to think about the impact that it can have is in the customer's experience. Now, some of you might you might use the word customer. Maybe you use the phrase constituents. Maybe you use the phrase people who live within our city or our county, right? So think about whoever your customers are, and your customers as an HR professional can be internal to the organization or external to the organization. And so if we're not setting boundaries and we're not able to get all of the things done that we need to be getting done, what can happen is that it might be that people aren't getting the services that they need from our organization. It might be that as organizationally, the commitments that we make to our customers, we're not able to make good on those. Okay. Which then in the long run, just like we had talked about how it can impact your reputation of yourself personally, it can also impact the reputation of the organization as well. And then the last section that we have here in terms of consequences can actually go in terms of our stakeholders, who could also include our customers, but it can include other people as well. Okay, our vendors, our partners, either our partners at a different level. So if I'm a city or county or special district type of entity, it might have a negative impact on others with whom we do business. Some of them could be customers. Some of them could also be colleagues and constituents as well. And so our stakeholders might lose faith in us, which can turn into things like a media problem, right? Maybe a backlash from our stakeholders or from the media. It could even cause problems like health and safety risks, or well-being risks for the people who depend on us and the services that we provide. So I'm trying to really appeal to your sense of not only if you don't set boundaries, might it negatively impact you personally and professionally? Yes, if that's not enough to kind of get you thinking about how can I set some boundaries, I want you to think about some of those bigger picture things, the organization, the customers, the stakeholders. Okay. All right. So we've talked a little bit about setting boundaries and what happens when we don't set boundaries. I'd like to go ahead and move into the second concept that we're recommending in terms of how to reduce your overwhelm. And that's going to be the concept of declutter. Now, when you say declutter, sometimes we might think, okay, I need to clean out my closet. I need to clean out my garage. I need to clean out that kitchen drawer that I can't even close anymore because there's so much stuff in there and I don't even know what's in there anymore. But I encourage you to think about, and those are part of decluttering as well. Let's just be clear. But another part of decluttering might be decluttering what you're doing at your job. Okay, and so the visual that we have there is a visual that is a mind map. And so those of you who are familiar with the concept of mind mapping, it's a way to break down a number of maybe larger tasks into smaller pieces and components, and identifying their relationship that they have to one another. So, for example, you can see just in the visual that we have there, strategy and policy. Depending upon which strategy and which policy we're talking about, it can impact recruitment, it can impact EEO, it can impact human capital, it can impact workforce and workforce reductions. So you can see the impact that it has and how one thing will touch another thing and have an impact on it. So as we're looking at decluttering, one thing to do is identify your priorities. What are the things that we really need to work on? What are the things that are important to us? What are the things that are going to have the most impact? Then use some tools to help you get organized. Mind mapping could be one, could be prioritizing. A concept that we're going to go into next is a way to prioritize using the concept of importance versus urgency. Okay, so we're going to get to that a little bit more, but as we're looking at how do you declutter, we're not just talking about cleaning off your desk or cleaning out the garage. We're really talking about how can you declutter, get clarity on what's important, get clarity on what is your mission during this time, and then retool and reprioritize what you need to be working on and what you need to focus on. Here's what I think is one of the hardest parts to this is we've got to be willing to say no. And you might think, oh, Janine, I can't say no. That would not go over well. All right, well, maybe the answer isn't no. Maybe the response is not now. Is now the time to be doing this? Okay, and so looking at the the projects that you have that you're working on, the responsibilities that you have. Are there things where you can say, no, we're not going to do that, or we're not going to do it right now? We'll do it in a month. We'll do it in 3 months. We'll do it when we're not quite so busy with new regulations. We'll do it when we're not quite so busy getting people to comfortably work from home. All right, so here's what I'd like to ask that you do. I'd like to ask that you get a piece of paper. We're actually going to get some work done during this webinar. How does that sound? Go ahead and grab a piece of paper, and here's what I'd like to ask that you do. On your piece of paper, you're going to need something to write with as well. I'd like for you to take just a couple of minutes, and I would like for you to write down on a piece of paper 10 priorities that you have. What are 10 priorities that are important to you? I'd prefer that you keep it more work related, but I also recognize that there's a fine line between work and your work life and your personal life. So if some personal things creep in there, that's fine. What are 10 priorities that you're working on right now? I'm going to be quiet while you do that. As I think about priorities as an HR professional, sometimes it might be keeping your employees engaged during this time. Keeping up with those regulations that we talked about earlier. In our poll, part of the uncertainty of so many things, I'm not sure which things I need to be focusing on because there's just so much uncertainty. I'm not sure what I need to work on and what I do not need to work on. And then even things like shelter in place, right? As I'm identifying how do I shelter in place, many of us, we're creating home work environments that we've never had to do before. Many of us are sharing these homework environments with students, with roommates, with spouses, with grandparents, significant others. All right. So do you have a list? Just think about 10 priorities that you have, primarily focusing on your work, but also adding in some of those personal things because that's a blurred line. It's a gray area. Okay, step number 2, here's what I'm going to ask that you do. Is now what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to identify or put a check next to the 7 of your priorities that have to get done. Okay, go through your top 10. I don't want you to overthink it. Put a check next to no more than 7. Okay. So essentially what I'm asking that you do is you're taking your top 10 list and now you're saying, okay, what are 7 things that just must get done? I know this is hard, isn't it? And if you started off with a list of 20, I still want you to go down to 7, by the way. It's difficult. All right, so you're taking your list of 10, and now you take it to 7.
Janine, we have a question about this exercise. So someone's asking, yes, when you talk about the priorities, are you referring to individual tasks?
So they can be tasks. Absolutely, they can be tasks, or they might be projects. So what I might think of right now is one of my priorities is identifying for my organization, identifying pay programs and benefits programs for our employees, because so many more of them, we might be reducing the number of hours that they're working on. Okay, it might be my individual tasks as well. What are the most important things, your highest priorities in your job? For me, an example of a thing that really isn't necessarily a priority is filing. I don't like to file, but if it doesn't get done, then there's a problem because you can't find anything. Julie, thanks for jumping in. If there are other questions coming up in chat, thanks for jumping in. Okay, here's step number 3. You're not going to like this at all, because guess what I'm going to ask you that you do now? Is now I'd like for you to put a star next to no more than 3 things from your priority list. 3 things that, well, and let me just kind of clarify this. So stop for just a second. Put a star next to 3 things that you might be able to delegate or that perhaps someone else can do. Maybe it's somebody that you can partner with. Maybe it is employee self-service. Could the employee themselves complete the form? I'm just really trying to ask that you think a little bit about what's the work that you're doing. That was your top 10 list. What are the most important 7 things that you're doing? And then identify, about 3 things that maybe someone else could help you with. All right. Okay. So what we're really trying to do is try to get some clarity in what are the important things that we need to work on, because there's so many. The overwhelm is definitely there. I've got so much to do. We've got to figure out how to get some clarity in what's important. All right. So now you've got your list. It went from 10 down to 7, and then hopefully you were able to identify, hopefully 3, maybe you were able to identify 4 things that someone else could do. Maybe it could be that it could be automated. Okay. And I'm not thinking really long term in the next 3 to 5 years. What are some things that maybe could be automated fairly easily? We've been thinking about using DocuSign or, putting things out on a shared drive or a SharePoint, something like that. Okay. Decluttering, just like cleaning out your garage and putting all the camping things in one space and all the tools in another place. Once it's decluttered, then you can have some clarity and see what it is that you need to get done. All right. Next concept. So we've talked about overwhelm. We've talked about setting boundaries. We've talked about decluttering. Now we're going to talk about the big one, and this is prioritizing. Okay. So this concept is actually oftentimes called the Eisenhower Matrix. Okay. Maybe you've heard it called that. What it is, it's a way to identify and differentiate between what's important and what's urgent. Okay, so let's start over there in that green square. You'll see above the green square, it says urgent. And so both the green and the red square are intended to be urgent items. The 2 squares on the right-hand side those would be are not urgent. Now, if we lay a second layer on top of this, we're going to talk about importance. And so that green square is both urgent and important. Okay. The light blue square would be not urgent, but it's still important. The lower left is urgent, but not important. And then the lower right is not urgent and not important. So as we're trying to decide what work needs to be done, when does it need to be done, who needs to do it, right? This is one of our strategies and how we might be able to set some boundaries, okay? How we might be able to declutter. So let's get some examples of different things we might be prioritizing in our work. So let's look at, if you'll notice, each one of these different squares has a number to them. We call them quadrants. And so that green square is also called quadrant 1. You'll see that in the lower right-hand portion of the square. These are the things that are both urgent and important. These are the things that you have to do. And quite frankly, you need to do them now, okay? So some examples of that might be things like new compliance orders that are coming out, new laws that are being enacted with an immediate deadline, okay? And even our reactions to how we need to shelter in place. So maybe you even think back a few weeks ago or maybe over a month ago. My gosh, okay, so we have shelter in place. How do we get our employees to work from home? How do we set things up? Do we have them take their computers home? What about the accessibility of files? We had to make all those decisions. Those decisions were urgent and important. They had to be done right now. Okay, now if we compare it to, let's go to quadrant number 2. So go right and you'll see that light blue square. That says what action you should take is you should decide if it's important, but maybe it's not urgent. Now is the time that it needs to be done. Can it be done in the future? I'm not saying put it off indefinitely, but could it be done later? and schedule some time to do it. If you're thinking about your work week, maybe I do it by Friday. Maybe I do it by the end of next week. Things that might fall into this category of important but not urgent, maybe things like planning, right? My planning is really important. I need to plan out my next week. I need to plan out my next quarter. I need to plan to hire a certain number of people, or maybe I need to plan for my layoffs. But if it's not urgent, if we're not doing it right now, some contingency planning can go here as well. It's important, but it might not be urgent. Then schedule a time to do it. Decide when is the right time to do it. Okay. Third quadrant down there in the lower left, the red quadrant says delegate. Now, these are the things that fall into the category of urgent, but not important. Now, I think we've all come across these things. Somebody else comes up to you, and if they come up to me, they're Janine, we have to do this right now. It's this really urgent thing that we have to do. And then I need to put my filter on to say, is this important? A lot of interruptions that we have throughout our workday, they're urgent, maybe to someone else, but they might not fall into your category of important. Okay, so oftentimes these might be other people's priorities. Maybe it's things that you don't have to do. Is it something that someone else could do? Somebody really needs to do this, that, or the other. Okay, well, is it me? Do I need to do it? But can somebody else do it? So I encourage you to think a little bit about who has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do it. Maybe who can partner. So when I say delegate, it doesn't mean that the project or the task has to completely come out of your area, but maybe you partner on it. And so somebody else does a piece of it and you do a piece of it. Okay. Look for other people who have the abilities and the skills to be able to do that. Even if they can't do it as well as you, it might be best to go ahead and delegate it. When you've got so many other important and urgent things on your plate, you need to decide if it's not important, but maybe it's urgent, can somebody else do it? All right, let's go ahead and go to that fourth quadrant. Are you ready? All right, so the last, this is the hard one. This is really hard. So this one is eliminate it, just delete it. If it's not urgent and it's not important, we need to take a really honest look to say, why are we even doing this? Why are we doing it? Okay, and so the things that oftentimes fall into this particular quadrant, or quadrant 4, might be some meetings. Do you ever end up in a meeting where you're thinking, why am I here? This is not important to me. This is not urgent to me or the work that I do. Not just my personal opinion, it's not important to the work that I do. So why do you continue to go to those meetings? Great question. Some of these can be some of the nice to haves. For me, taking the time to unsubscribe from the lots and lots and lots of emails that I get, that's going to be a piece of it as well. So unsubscribing to emails, any types of obligations that you might have that really aren't important or urgent to you, but maybe you have guilt with it, then that may be something that falls into this category as well. It can be hard to find things that fall into this particular category. But I'll tell you what, in your prioritization, if you can identify at least a few things to delete, then that can just be fantastic. All right, so here's what I'd like to ask that you do. I'd like for you to draw this diagram on a sheet of paper and make it big on your sheet of paper. Make it so that it's nice and big so that you can actually write some things in it. Okay, so draw all 4 of these quadrants. And then here's what I'm going to ask that you do. All right, I'm going to give you another 10 to 15 seconds to draw this Eisenhower Matrix, because what we're going to do is I'm going to ask that you fill in your matrix. What are your examples of things that belong in that do box? What are your examples of the things that maybe they're not so urgent, but they're important and they need to go? You need to decide to schedule a time to do it. The things that go in your delegate area and then in your delete area. All right, are you ready? So here's the instructions on what I'd like to ask that you do next. Those top 10 priorities that you identified earlier, just so you don't have to rewrite your list, I'd like for you to take those top 10 priorities and identify which quadrant they belong in the urgent and important matrix. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think that through and go ahead and take all 10 and identify, is it urgent and important? Put it in the do category. If it's important, but not necessarily urgent, put it in the decide category and decide when is it that you're going to need to do it. If it's something that's urgent, but it's not important, delegate. And who can you delegate to? Even if you're in an HR department of one, I encourage you to think about how can I utilize other resources within the organization? Is this something that I have to do or that the HR part of the organization has to do? Or could it be done somewhere else? Can someone else collect those forms? Can employees self-service on this particular item? Do we need to outsource this particular item? Okay. And then hopefully you can find at least one thing to go into your delete quadrant. All right, I'll give you another few seconds to take your top 10 priorities and put them back in those quadrants. There are those 4 quadrants again in case you missed them. All right, so I've asked that you do this exercise yourself based upon the work that you do. Now remember, you can do this stuff for your personal life too. Okay, you can do it for your personal life too. So now that you've identified which quadrant each one of your priorities belong in, I encourage you to think about how can we build some organizational resiliency? Because right now, so many people are just so quickly trying to do all the work that they can possibly do, and they're working from home and it's this uncertain time. Perhaps if you could share this with other parts of your organization, it could build some more resiliency within your organization. Maybe it is that you share it within your HR team and you have everybody on your HR team to decide what are your priorities, right? What are the things that are important and urgent? This can help you even as an HR team to decide what are the things that you're going to work on, what are the things that you're going to say not now, and what are the things that you're going to say while that's a valid project to work on or something valid or a nice to have, we're not going to do it. It can help you say that magic word no or even not now. And if you teach others how to do this as well, then they can understand better and come up with some a common vision on what's important for the organization. Okay, so I encourage you that you teach others about the Eisenhower Matrix and how to identify things as important and urgent. Okay, so now you should have 2 lists, right? You had your top 10 list that I asked you to check off the top 7 of your top 10 list, and then put asterisks next to 3 things that potentially you could delegate. I asked you to use that same list, and we use the Eisenhower Matrix to identify and help you prioritize what's urgent and what's important. Okay, and this might look similar to Stephen Covey's work, isn't it? Those of you who are familiar with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this is something that Stephen Covey also recommends as well. Okay, all right, so let's move on to our third area that we're going to talk about today. So we've talked about overwhelm, we've talked about setting boundaries, we've talked about decluttering, we've talked about importance and urgency. And then the next thing that we're going to talk about is personal care for you, right? I go back to the metaphor that we started with earlier today, and that is, when the plane is having problems, when the airplane is having problems and those oxygen masks come down, you've really got to put yours on first. You really do. And that might be completely counterintuitive to what you want to do, and it might be counterintuitive to what you think is best. But you're here in this webinar for a reason, because I think that there's at least some recognition that, wow, I need to care for myself. Okay, so let's talk about personal care for you. Okay, so this is where we're really talking about how can you care for yourself. This is an unusual time, you guys. Set some reasonable expectations for yourself. Give yourself a break. Now is not the time where the expectation should be of you or of your teams to be running at optimal capacity and super, super productivity. So set some reasonable expectations. There's a lot going on. You yourself might be trying to be a fifth grade teacher to your child and be an employee. You might be working where a lot of the tools and the files that you need might be back at the office and you're working from home and you can only go pick those up periodically. And so set some reasonable expectations for yourself. Give yourself a little bit of a break. Okay. All right. Second thing for your personal care, let go of things that are out of your control. Think about what are the things that you have control over or influence over. And if you don't have one of those two things, control or influence, do your best to let it go. Kind of a common phrase that I like to use is, that's not my circus, those aren't my monkeys. They're not within my control. I have nothing to do with it. Now, it might bother me, it might irritate me, it might have a little bit of an impact on me, but if it's out of my control, I would be better served if I spent my time and energy on the things that I can control, or maybe even the things that I can influence. But unfortunately, we don't have control over everything. And right now, I think we're really seeing a real sense of that, is we don't have control over a lot of things. So as the best you can, let them go. Let those things go. Third one, give yourself a break. Going back to, this might not be your most productive time in your career. You guys, that's okay. That's okay. And the other kind of the mixed message on give yourself a break, be sure you're taking your breaks. I know sometimes working from home might mean that you forget to take a lunch break or even get up and stretch. Okay, so make sure that you're getting up and taking care of you personally. And sometimes that can be giving yourself a break in terms of expectations of yourself, but also taking your breaks that are important for your body and for your mental well-being as well. Okay. Fourth bullet, pay attention to your personal life. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with your loved ones, with your friends, your families. Pay attention to those things, right? People right now are a little bit unsettled. And so check in with them. Be kind, be graceful, be generous, because sometimes they might respond in a way that's not their normal way, right? And so be generous. Give them a little bit of a break too. All right, second to the last. We know this one, and so it's really going to be more about reminding you. Please take care of yourself. Have a good diet. So that word diet does not mean lose weight. That word diet is make sure that you're eating things that are good for you. Sometimes when we're working from home, we go for the convenience foods and the snacks that maybe aren't healthy for our bodies, but be aware of what you're eating and how that impacts your body. Try to get some exercise. Go take a walk. Get some fresh air. Yesterday, I did an online meeting from outside, and it was so glorious. Oh my gosh, no other time have I been able to sit on my back patio and have a meeting. And oh, it was just so wonderful. You could just feel the air and the fresh air and hear the birds a little bit. It was so nice. So get outside whenever you can. Just take care of yourself. Do something that you enjoy. Maybe it's a hobby that you haven't done in a while, but take some care of yourself as well. And then lastly, do anything to reduce your stress. If reducing your stress means going on a walk, go on a walk. If it means playing your guitar or crocheting, whatever it is that you enjoy doing, do anything to take care of your stress, because even though you might not recognize it, right now there's a lot going on. And when I asked you earlier about what's overwhelming you right now, you might not recognize it, but that is a form of stress. Right. And in our poll, I'm looking back through my notes for our poll, the uncertainty of so many things, that uncertainty has an impact on your stress and your well-being. Okay. Coming in second was working from home and that work-life balance. So do some things that will help reduce that stress of working from home? Do you always have to work in the same location? If you're trying to work from the kitchen table and there's too much noise around there, then try to find a new place. Try to find a peaceful place. Okay. All right. Take care of yourself. Okay. The oxygen masks have fallen. And so now's the time to take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. It's not selfish. It's actually the right thing to do. All right, it's time for another poll. Let's go ahead and jump into our next poll. So Julie is going to help us out. So the question is, what is one thing that you will do to reduce your overwhelm and care for yourself? So this is really about actions. What actions are you really going to take? We've talked about setting boundaries at work and at home. We've talked about decluttering, and even kind of breaking apart what are the priorities that I have at work, just kind of breaking those into smaller pieces. It can also mean cleaning out the closet. That's fine too. So again, go ahead and click all of them that apply. Or no, excuse me.
No,
just
this was a select one. This one was a select one.
Yeah, select one. What's one thing that you'll do to reduce your overwhelm? Make this commitment to yourself.
I'm seeing a pretty clear winner so far.
Are you?
Would you care to venture a guess?
Personal care. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Well, in fact, I'm going to be able to close up this poll in just a few seconds and share those results with you. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. And survey says.
Let's see.
Share it.
I want to know. I want to know.
Okay. 29% said increase my personal care. You were absolutely spot on.
Okay.
The next one was prioritize, using important and urgent.
Oh, good.
Right, and then the rest of them were pretty close. We had 16% that specified setting boundaries. Excuse me. After that, it was focus on my top priorities, and last was decluttering.
Okay.
So there you have it.
All right. Good. So this question is really intended for you to think about, what actions am I really going to take? Right? What are the things that I'm really going to do? All right. And we're going to go ahead and go into a Q&A portion for this as well. And I encourage you to, use the chat box for this as well. We've got a little bit of time left. I think Julie might have some questions that I might be seeing. So we'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A.
Okay, terrific. So we do have some questions that have come in so far. So first one is, how do we deal with the overload of information from different government agencies?
Wow.
I can see how that could be stressful, yes. So what do we do with that?
Yeah, there's a lot coming in, isn't there? From the Department of Labor, from the Employment Development Department. What do we do with unemployment? Those kinds of things as well. So, all right. So a few things. I kind of like to use my decluttering or my compartmentalizing with this one as well. Is take some time to get what are your main themes that you're going with, right? If we're talking about wage and hour, what are the wage and hour things that are important? Being aware of where we are with shelter in place and what we can and can't do, and who are our essential workers and who are not our essential workers. But taking it in some bite-sized pieces, and don't overwhelm yourself. Okay. So I know right now it can be really easy to become just glued to the TV and, overemphasizing looking at all these different government agencies. But I encourage you to know your themes and start and use that important and urgent concept. What are the things that we have to do now? There's so much uncertainty right now. I'm not going to worry about what might be coming for 2021 or 2022. I'm going to focus on second, third, and maybe fourth quarter of 2020, and do some contingency planning. I'm not saying ignore your contingency planning, but there are a lot of unknowns right now. So focus on what you know and just kind of compartmentalize.
Okay, thank you. Here's another one that just came in asking if you have any suggestions on how to orient yourself when you're assigned to a new section. In this case, someone was recently assigned to labor relations, and they are finding that the things and people in their new unit are just not organized, and it's very overwhelming. So do you have some insight into that?
Yeah. So in my career, I've certainly been thrown into some new areas. I know when I transitioned from a recruiter to an HR generalist, it was overwhelming. It's so much. So orienting yourself to a new section, I would recommend understanding decluttering things. Okay. So understanding some things into some themes. Okay. So what do I need to know about employee relations? What do I need to know about safety laws? What do I need to know about wage and hour? And then start with the big concepts first. I would go back to my urgency and importance, Eisenhower Matrix again, and say, okay, what do I need to learn now? And what do I need to learn later? And do a little bit of an inventory to see who your resources are. So even on using the delegating piece of it, it might be, we already have an expert who's my safety expert. And so if I can rely on the safety expert for now, I'll learn that stuff later, but now is not the time where I'm going to try to learn something that we already have a really good resource for. So look at your entire team, and then learn what you can in big themes, and don't worry about learning everything all at once. Use your whole team.
Those are great words of wisdom. Thank you. Another person writes in saying, I'm seeing that this is time to revise process and streamline them. However, is this the time to do process improvement while we are in a shelter-in-place status and working remotely?
Okay, love that question. So this might be a time to revise and streamline, but maybe not make things absolutely perfect. Is that what you're saying? Julie, am I getting the general gist of it?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, all right. So now might be a very good time to revise and streamline. That's a great thing where it might be something that's important. And some of those things I would start off with the things that are important and urgent. So if I'm revising and streamlining, figure out where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? Where am I going to create the greatest efficiencies? And I would start there. Now might not be the time to get things exactly 100% perfect, okay? And go for even greater efficiencies. Now might not be the time for that. There'll be a time for that. But I would, again, as you're prioritizing, decide what are the things that are important, and without any guilt and without feeling bad about it, ask those questions when you're working on process improvements. Is not the time for us to process improve? Or can we do that when we're in a better place?
Okay, that makes great sense. Thank you very much. Here's another question that came in asking, how do we keep employees engaged and feeling valued during these times?
Yeah, how do we keep employees engaged and valued? So I was teaching a leadership class earlier this morning, actually, and we talked a lot about communication. Now is the time to communicate, communicate, communicate. Employees are feeling, not all of them, some employees, maybe many employees, are feeling isolated. They're feeling alone. And the group that I was working with earlier today, they actually said they have employees who are feeling lonely. And so keeping those lines of communication absolutely open. Encourage your managers to be contacting their employees frequently, particularly if their employees, if the team is dispersed and they're working from home right now, or maybe if they're not seeing each other on a regular basis, making sure that managers are really making sure that they're keeping that one-on-one connection with their employees. The same holds true for HR. we need to be sending out and communicating with our employees what's going on. What do they need to know now? What are the things that we have answers on? And sometimes, and this feels awkward to communicate, but it's so important to communicate this, is to say, we don't know the answer to certain things right now. We're going to keep our eye on it. And as soon as we have something, we will notify you. Or if we have an estimate, we expect to know something by the end of June. And so we'll get back with you as soon as we know more. But error on the side of over communicating instead of under communicating, that's going to help reduce your employees' anxiety and angst. And it's going to help them stay more engaged with the organization because they feel like, gosh, the organization actually cares. Even if they don't have all the answers, they're at least saying, I don't have all the answers yet, but we're working on it. Or I don't have all the answers yet, and you should hear more by the end of June, or whatever the date is for your organization.
Oh, that's such great advice. Thank you. We have one more question. Oh boy, asking, how do I avoid burnout when taking care of others? I think you addressed this. Can you cover it once more?
Whew. You know, burnout's hard. Burnout and overwhelm. I don't know if there's a technical difference, but they're feeling kind of cousins, right? So avoiding burnout. You guys, it goes back to taking good care of yourself, taking your breaks, right? Go stretch your legs, walk around. If you can't walk, you're not walking around the office. Maybe it is that you walk around the house, walk around the neighborhood. So getting out and, stretching your legs, making sure that you're keeping a normal work day. If you normally work 8 to 5, I highly encourage you is at the end of at 5 o'clock, that's the end of your work day. I know that your computer might be sitting on your kitchen table. Fold it up, move it away. Okay. Work time is now over. Many of us might decompress on our commute on the way home, and we don't have that decompression time anymore to differentiate between work and home. So maybe what you do is you take a walk around the block as your commute home. Okay, those might be some things that might help during with burnout. I also recommend that you use some of the strategies that we talked about today in terms of looking to see what's important and what's urgent, and that can help you with reduce the amount of burnout, because you guys, we've got to be in it for the long haul. And this is the short term right now. And so we've really got to take care of ourselves so that we're able to switch gears, because there will come a time where people are going to start coming back to work on a more regular basis, and we're going to change things up a little bit. Now, will it go back to exactly the way that things were? And will people work every hour of their work week in the office again? I don't know. But we'll be called upon to ask for strategies in how do we come out of this pandemic. And that's going to mean, how do we bring people back into the workplace? And so we need to be ready to do that. Not that we have to have all the answers right now, but we have to have taken care of ourselves well enough so that we're not burned out. So when we've got that heavy lifting to do, we still have some energy to do it.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a great question and a great answer, so thank you. So with that, I believe we can wrap up this wonderful presentation. I want to thank you, Janine, for such a helpful and timely presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Please be sure to check our website at www.cpshR.us/about/events/webinars for the slide deck, the resource list, and the recording. The recording should be available within 1 to 2 business days. So thank you again to everybody, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.